What's up, fam? Welcome back to another chilling chapter. Before we dive into today's twisted mystery, Miss Marple and the Scarlet Web, hit me up. What made you smile today, and where in the world are you listening from? I'm featuring your stories in the next drop, so don't be shy. Now grab your tea, dim the lights, and get ready, because nothing in Whispers in the Fog is ever what it seems. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Locked Door at Midnight. The rain fell in relentless sheets outside the creaky manor of Enderby Hall, heavy droplets pattering on the windows like a frantic heartbeat. Inside, the mingling scents of damp wood and aged leather created an atmosphere thick with anticipation. A single lantern flickered at the end of a long corridor, where shadows danced in the wavering light, too often drawing the prying gaze of anxious guests who lingered in the grand drawing room. Mrs. Emily Cripps, a formidable woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, had invited a small group of neighbors over for what she called an intimate soirée. But tonight, intimacy felt like a facade draped over a too obvious seam of tension. When the clock struck midnight, a sudden hush fell upon the room, deepened by the storm's growl from beyond. It was then that a blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness, echoing through the vast hallways. A distraught Miss Tiddles, Mrs. Cripps's aging cat, leapt from her perch and scuttled beneath a massive sideboard, sending a prickle of discomfort across the assembled guests. Moments later, another scream, this time shrill with panic, pierced the thick air. It was followed by the sound of hurried footsteps as everyone rushed toward the source, the study. In the middle of that room, framed by shadows, stood the imposing oak door, famously known as the Room of Secrets. Mrs. Cripps had insisted it remain locked at all times. A master key was said to be well guarded, and as local law suggested, contained treasures and family secrets that should never see the light of day. But now it was ominously ajar, swinging ever so slightly, a sinister invitation that filled the room with a thick energy of unease. "I swear I just saw someone inside," piped up Clara, a girl of barely 18, her face as pale as the family portraits hanging on the walls. Her wide blue eyes darted from one adult to another, as if searching for validation, or perhaps an escape. "Inside," uttered Charles Grimshaw, the local botanist, with a tendency to theatrics. "A ghost, perhaps? Or an uninvited guest?" His laughter, meant to breach the tension, merely intensified it, sending shivers down the spines of the young women present. A calm, yet commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Let us inspect the room, shall we?" It was Miss Jane Marple, the village's steady hand and the keenest mind. She appeared much as she always did, a drizzle of grey in her hair, her simple attire belied by the directness of her gaze. She stepped past the threshold, pushing the door fully open with an air of assuredness. Inside, the room was dim, cluttered with papers and old books strewn about in disarray, but it was the stillness around a polished desk that caught Miss Marple's attention. The papers there lay scattered, a curious assortment of letters and documents. Yet one stood out, a letter with a wax seal, distinctly marked with a crest she could not place at first. She picked it up, unfolding it carefully. "It speaks of a family inheritance," she muttered. "Mysterious indeed. But why would it be left here? And to whom does this crest belong?" Noting the uncertainty in her voice, the gathering of guests looked on, some whispering doubts about the nature of the contents. "Miss Marple," remarked Mrs. Cripps in a notably shaky tone, "perhaps we should close that door and leave this to the police. Could this not be someone's practical joke? Or worse, a madman with malicious intent? The detective turned her attention back to the letter. Yes, a joke. Maybe simple in execution, but the emotions it would evoke in this household do not seem to suit any such triviality. A sharp glance at Clara indicated something deeper. Tell me, dear, why would you be so distressed about something occurring in here? Clara hesitated, but the inquisitive gaze from Miss Marple compelled her to speak. I swear I saw someone lurking at the window just before we heard the screams, a shadow darting away. I thought perhaps it was a trick of the light, but I've had dreams of this manor being haunted. I thought it was just nonsense, dear. Miss Marple gently reassured her, her eyes glinting as she pieced together threads of unease. But until we resolve this mystery, I suggest you keep a level head. Suddenly, the lantern flickered dramatically before the power could momentarily deflate the tension in the room. Then, it happened. Above a pile of letters, a slight rustle echoed triumphantly through the silence. All heads turned simultaneously to the far wall, where a painting of a woman in vintage attire hung with an imposing stare. Miss Marple moved towards it instinctively. A nagging instinct jangled through her. This painting, it features the same crest. The words fizzled out like the last spark of a firework, leaving behind a cold, electric buzz in the air. If there was a hidden cache of secrets surrounding this family, and it appeared there was, then this door was merely a facade for far worse. But then, just as she leaned in, closer, a bolt was heard from the door they had entered moments prior. It slammed shut with a resounding finality, leaving them all breathless. Frantic exchanges between guests ensued, but it was Miss Marple's sharp nod that gathered their attention once again. Stay calm, everyone. We must determine who or what exacted this sinister deed. For now, I fear our intrigue has merely begun. As the bell tolled sweetly beyond the manor's stone walls, the storm thrummed below. But within the walls of Enderby Hall, a darker storm was brewing, laden with secrets and shadows. And somewhere, not far away, the echo of a hidden motive whispered against the walls. The next minute brought the greatest twist of all, a faint scuffle accompanied by another scream from within the locked door. Unbeknownst to them, a figure was moving amidst the chaos, and it was not done yet. A finality in the air warned that revelations awaited, and Miss Marple, poised as ever, readied herself for an unfolding tale of betrayal. We will uncover every truth behind this day, she murmured to herself, knowing that the locked door had only begun to reveal its grim story. Chapter 2. A letter arrives too late. The rain beat down in relentless sheets, tapping against the window panes of Miss Marple's modest cottage, as though seeking admission. It had been a dreary day, the kind of day that hung heavily on the heart, filling even the mundane routines of St. Mary Mead with an air of discomfort. Inside, the familiar clutter of novels stacked high and flowers wilting in their vases provided a soothing backdrop, but the tranquility shattered the moment the letter arrived. It slid rather ominously through the letterbox, a mere slip of yellowing paper, whose edges had absorbed the dampness of the world outside. Miss Marple, nestled in her armchair with a freshly knitted scarf, was startled by the unexpected intrusion. She rose, her old bones creaking like the floors of the manor houses she often frequented, and ambled toward the door. As she peered out through the heavily dripping foliage, she knew it was not just any ordinary letter. Even the postmaster had raised an eyebrow while handing it over, as if to say, "Be careful." She took the letter into her hands, examining it closely. The address scrawled in the corner was familiar, yet puzzled her. It was meant for Geoffrey Inglewood, a gentleman she had met only a week prior at a gathering of their mutual acquaintance, Lady Trotter. His charm had been pronounced, his laughter infectious. But now there was a darkness to his memory that loomed in the back of her mind. Why would he be receiving correspondence on this night, and what had transpired since their last meeting? Her curiosity piqued, Miss Marple sat down and slid her finger under the fragile paper. The contents unfurled to reveal hurried scrawls that spiraled chaotically across the page. The ink was smudged, as if written in haste. "Geoffrey, I am afraid I have bad news." The words rolled forth in a dreadful anticipation, but the rest had become indecipherable, punctuated by erratic lines that hinted at a crisis. Her instincts prickled. Clocking how his name was mentioned with urgency, Miss Marple knew she had to act swiftly, though darkness was falling swiftly outside. She gently folded the letter, and having no time to waste, grabbed her old tweed coat and stepped out into the clammy evening air. The village streets glistened, and the scent of wet earth filled her lungs. With each step toward Inglewood's house, her heart played a discordant rhythm, fueled by the expected evil she felt lurking in the shadows. The Inglewood residence stood majestic and imposing against a backdrop of silver clouds. A flickering lamp in the window beckoned, but the sheer size of the old manor seemed to shield away the vibrant spirit once associated with Geoffrey. Miss Marple approached the entrance, but as the rain poured harder, she realized with a jolt that it seemed unusually quiet. The door was ajar. Tentatively, she pushed the door further open, and the creak echoed eerily. "Geoffrey," she called, the unease settling firmly in her stomach. There was silence, followed only by the patter of rain on the cobblestones outside. The air felt thick and dangerously still. The grand hallway loomed ahead, decorated by dark wood paneling, yet the atmosphere felt decisively cold. Miss Marple's instincts sharpened. She walked further in, her footsteps muted by the plush carpet. As she made her way to the drawing room, she paused, spotting a glint on the ground, a brass handle from what appeared to be an antique drawer half open amongst the clutter of fallen books. She knelt down for a closer inspection, her heart racing. It was then that she noticed a slight bulge in the carpet, leading to the base of the fireplace. Gathering her wits, she gently lifted the corner of the carpet to reveal a loose floorboard. Just beneath it lay a small compartment hidden away, bathed in shadows but not obscured from her sharp gaze, a tarnished locket, clasped tightly as if guarding secrets within. The locket bore the initials MG and was adorned with delicate floral engravings, a stark contrast to the sinister air of the room. Miss Marple's mind spun into action. The initials belonged to Geoffrey's estranged wife, Margaret, whose tragic passing had always stirred whispers of profound sadness and scandal within the village. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps rang out from the upper floors, making Miss Marple freeze. Her heart thundered in her chest. Someone else was here. The footsteps quickened, and a sense of urgency pounded in her ears. Just as she marched toward the staircase to investigate, she caught sight of a shadow flickering above, a figure watching her. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady, despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I know someone is up there." The figure vanished like a wisp of smoke, and panic surged through her. With a quick decision, she darted back to the drawing room, clutching the locket tightly in her palm. She needed to connect the dots before it was too late. How did this locket appear here? And more importantly, the letter. What news had it contained? It might have reached Geoffrey's hands just in time to prevent a tragedy. Perhaps in this tangled web of intrigue, Geoffrey himself was not merely a victim, but a piece in a larger, catastrophic puzzle. Just then, a harrowing scream pierced the air from the direction of the upstairs. The world tilted in that moment, and with it arrived the dreadful realization that Geoffrey might not be the only victim after all. Miss Marple rushed for the staircase, the locket clutched fiercely against her chest. A gripping suspense filled her as she thought grimly, whatever lay ahead was about to unveil a truth darker than she could dare imagine, and she might have just unraveled a thread that would lead her right into peril. Chapter 3. The Last Guest at the Midnight Train. The rattle of the train's wheels was swallowed by the downpour. Miss Marple peered through the fogged-up window of her compartment, the raindrops tracing streaks of silver against the inky blackness outside. It was an ordinary evening for a journey between the sleepy villages that dotted the countryside, but she was aware that this particular train carried secrets more sinister than the rain upon the roof. Just then, the sound of a muffled thud broke through the rhythm of the rain. Startled, Miss Marple turned sharply from the window. There was a swift knock on her compartment door, followed by a frantic voice. "Please, let me in. They're coming for me." It was a young woman, pale-faced, her eyes wide and darting. Miss Marple waved her in and locked the door behind her. "Calm yourself, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, offering a reassuring smile. "What's happened?" "They killed him," the girl gasped, her chest heaving with panic. "In the last train car. I saw it. He was... Oh, the blood everywhere." "Blood?" Miss Marple's brow furrowed as she surveyed the girl, whose hair was matted against her forehead and her dress soaked through. "Who? What are you talking about?" "The man with the brown hat." The girl dropped into a seat across from Miss Marple, wringing her hands. "He asked me for directions. I didn't think anything of it, but then I heard shouting and a gunshot." Miss Marple's interest was piqued. "And you truly believe he was murdered?" "Yes, and I'm sure they're coming for me now. I overheard them. If I hadn't left the car just then—" "Who are they?" Miss Marple pressed. "The ones in the black coats. They look dangerous. I thought they were just travelers." She glanced nervously at the door. "But I know what I saw. Blood. And those coats." Her voice faltered. Miss Marple leaned forward, her intuition sharpening. "Where exactly did you see this? On which carriage?" "Last car, I swear. I can take you. There." The girl's eyes widened, desperate and pleading. "But we have to move quickly." "Let us be prudent," Miss Marple replied, tapping her fingers together thoughtfully. "You wouldn't want to put yourself in danger, dear. It would be best to gather more information first while we're in this compartment." The young woman's breath caught as she considered Miss Marple's point. She was clearly agitated, not realizing the value of staying hidden. "You're right, but we need to do something." Miss Marple raised her finger, signaling for silence. The rhythmic sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The girl lunged for the window, eyes wide with terror. Miss Marple pressed herself closer to her, a look of steely determination in her eyes. This wasn't mere curiosity. It was the beginning of a perilous enigma. If we are to discern what truly occurred, we might consider the viewpoint of our assumed assassins, Miss Marple said, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the passengers?" The girl hesitated. "There was a stout gentleman with a newspaper earlier, but he left. That's when I approached the man in the brown hat. No one else seemed alarmed. Very interesting. The stout gentleman. You believe he has no connection to our mystery? Miss Marple asked, the wheels of her mind turning. What was he reading? A sensational scandal. Something about theft in London, I believe. The girl fell into thought, visibly shaken by the night's events. There was also a woman, elegantly dressed, who spoke in hushed tones with someone. Could it have been related? Miss Marple could sense pieces falling into place. I suspect we have a complex web of entanglements here, my dear. Each thread must be examined to reveal the full picture. Suddenly, another knock at the door jolted them both. The sound was more deliberate this time, stern, authoritative. Miss, we know you're in there. Open up. A chill crept into the air. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with the girl. They cannot suspect we know anything yet. We must remain still. Look for a way. The girl tugged at Miss Marple's sleeve, her face as pale as a ghost. I can hear them. They want to find the girl who saw it all. Miss Marple's mind raced, considering their options, when the door suddenly burst open. Standing there were two men in dark overcoats, their presence radiating menace. Sorry to intrude, ladies, one said, his voice smooth but heavy with threat. We're looking for a passenger. Think she might have ducked in here? A passenger? Miss Marple replied coolly, taking a breath to steady her own pounding heart. Not in this compartment, I assure you. You are mistaken. That's curious, the second man remarked, a smirk curling his lips. A young woman fled from the last carriage. We think she might have seen something rather unfortunate. Unfortunate? Miss Marple echoed, eyes narrowing. Are you sure it isn't a mere coincidence? There are surely many women traveling on this train. The men exchanged glances, suspicion tinging the air. You must understand, dear madam, we can't risk letting her slip through our fingers. We have... The sharp whistle of the train cut him off as it approached a station, the shrill sound matching the sudden tempo of Miss Marple's heart. She could feel the tension mounting, a crescendo of urgency that could shatter at any moment. The first man took a step forward, and Miss Marple noticed something glinting in his hand. She quickly grabbed the girl and stepped behind her seat, the train slowing to a halt with an ear-splitting screech. As the doors burst open and there was a rush of movement, Miss Marple's eyes darted to the corners of the compartment. There they were, countless clues hidden within the chaos. The newspaper the stout man had left behind lay crumpled on the floor. She bent down, her eyes scanning the inked headlines for something that echoed the events unfolding. Just then, the girl gasped, pointing out of the window. Look! Miss Marple turned to witness a figure moving swiftly across the platform. The man in the brown hat, slick as an eel, darting into the night. Suddenly, clarity struck. We must follow him, Miss Marple exclaimed, heart racing at the implications. He may lead us to the truth. Everything is connected. We've barely scratched the surface. As the last whistle of the train echoed into the dark, Miss Marple's mind swirled with revelations and possibilities, leaving behind a trail of uncertainty. The curtain was just lifting on the stage of this dark performance, and she would not rest until each actor was revealed. Chapter 4. The Will That Was Never Signed. The rain drummed insistently against the windows of the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, a velvet curtain of grey cloaking the sleepy homes in silence. Inside Thornfield Manor, which stood as a towering sentry at the end of a winding driveway, the atmosphere was eerily electric. Miss Marple had only just returned from the small investigation into the peculiar death of Harold Lumsden, a local poet turned reclusive gentleman. Now she found herself standing before the manor's hearth, fanning the vapors of a simmering cup of tea, when a blood-curdling scream jolted her into action. "Daphne!" an anguished voice cried from the drawing-room. Miss Marple's heart raced as she dashed to the source of the commotion. She pushed open the heavy oak door, her eyes immediately drawn to the shriveled figure of Mrs. Palmerson, the aging housekeeper, her hands trembling as she pointed towards the grand desk in the corner. Miss Marple's gaze followed her finger, landing on a figure hunched over the desk. It was Charles Lumsden, the late poet's estranged nephew, the one who stood to inherit everything should the poet's will be found as intended. His face, pale and drawn, revealed nothing but shock and the unmistakable tension of a man surrounded by a mystery. "What is it, Mrs. Palmerson?" Miss Marple questioned gently as she approached the desk. "What has happened?" "The will," the housekeeper breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "It was here. It was supposed to be here. And now, it's gone." She fumbled at the desk, revealing nothing but scattered papers, dusty manuscripts, and an empty envelope where the will ought to have been. "Are you sure of that?" Miss Marple asked, adopting a composed air as she leaned in closer. "I trust you were the one who saw the will last." "Yes, I swear on my life. Master Harold was waiting for the legalities to finalize everything," Mrs. Palmerson insisted. "It should have been lodged right here. Now it's disappeared." As the tension thickened, Miss Marple took another glance at Charles Lumsden. He wasn't merely a nephew overcome with grief. There was an edge to him, a strange blend of urgency and residue of resentment woven into his expression. "You do wish to inherit, do you not?" she posited, watching for any flicker in his demeanor. "Well, yes, but I've no reason to kill Uncle Harold," he replied sharply, his voice taut with indignation. He was already considering passing his estate to local charities. Miss Marple considered this revelation. If Harold Lumsden had intended to disinherit his nephew, had that been enough to drive Charles to desperation? What if it were true that he intended to change the will, she asked. What motive does anyone in this household have for stopping him? "The only secrets we keep are those we dare not speak of," came a new voice, silkily cold. Vivian Farrow, Harold's estranged sister and a notorious beauty even in her advanced years, glided into the room. Her eyes caught the dim light as she stood by the entrance, framed like a painting, a portrait of deceit and quiet rage. To make it known that there was a will never signed is a tragedy, Miss Marple, but you must understand it could also be a necessity. The tension escalated, each face turned towards her, portraits of intrigue framed in disbelief. "Necessity," Miss Marple echoed, intrigued at the layers she found within the woman's character. "Do you imply there were threats against your brother?" Vivian chuckled darkly, her laugh tinged with a suggestion of threats, long unspoken. "Ah, dear Miss Marple, you do have an insatiable desire for the undercurrents, don't you? All I meant was that some truths are better left buried, like forgotten wills or forgotten friendships." With the rain still lashing against the windows, lacing the atmosphere with a sense of entrapment, Miss Marple's keen instinct began to churn, piecing together fragments of uncertainty. She had seen the truth before. It had a way of unveiling itself when least expected. "Tell me, Vivian, did you wish to help him draft a new will? Would you not have some interest in his affairs?" "Help?" Vivian's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Nothing is, as you correctly phrase it, beneath me. But my brother had little right to keep his affairs tied up in such antiquity. Whatever inheritance we had was long reduced to mere musings." Suddenly, the room grew still, and the tension were brought to a halt by the incessant rapping of rain upon the window. Miss Marple turned her attention back to the desk. Something caught her eye amid the papers. There, delicate and unassuming, lay an antique letter opener. The tarnished silver seemed familiar. Miss Marple reached for it, inspecting the initials engraved on the handle. H.L. "This is yours, Charles, is it not?" "Of course, he gave it to me years ago," Charles admitted, his voice tight. "What of it?" As she toyed with the opener, Miss Marple's brow furrowed in thought. The connections took shape, and suddenly everything seemed to circle back to one striking question. Had Charles retrieved the will only to destroy or hide it? Gently, she pressed, "What led you to make your uncle so unhappy?" He flinched, but maintained a calm demeanor. "I loved my uncle. My intentions were never to harm him." But Miss Marple sensed the buried motive, an urgency in his eyes, when she asked, "Your uncle was going to leave his fortune to the charities that saved him from bankruptcy, wasn't he?" You seemed shaken. Before he could respond, the front door creaked open, followed by hurried footsteps, dampened by the squelching mud of rain-soaked shoes. They turned as the figure of Inspector Craddock materialized in the doorway, breathless and soaked through. "Miss Marple, I need your assistance," he blurted, urgent. "You'll want to see this." And with that, he produced a folded parchment from his pocket, shaking droplets from the edges as he laid it on the desk. Miss Marple's heart raced as she leaned closer, squinting at the crumpled document. It was a handwritten message, the words barely legible under the weight of rain and time. This was not a will, but a confession, or perhaps a threat. The truth loomed larger than the rain-laden sky. As she read further, her heart sank. This can't be, but it was, and in that moment, the door to Thornfield Manor seemed to groan under the weight of its secrets, leaving Miss Marple clinging to the edges of an impending storm. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Garden. The rain fell in heavy sheets, a relentless hammer that turned the quiet village of St. Mary Mead into a drenched canvas of glistening stones and shadowy corners. A flash of lightning illuminated the sprawling grounds of the old Brackenridge Manor, revealing briefly the eerie silhouette of its gnarled willows. Miss Marple, seated at her knitting in her snug sitting room, caught the faint echo of a muffled scream carried on the wind. Instinctively, her heart tightened. Just moments before, another revelation had unsettled the air. A pair of red-stained handkerchiefs, mysteriously missing from the drawing room, had been found tucked into the pocket of Mrs. Higgins's draped gown, their fabric coarse and unnatural. "The world's quite turned upside down," she murmured, her fingers pausing mid-stitch. "Little lies have a way of rearing up, just like wily weeds in a garden." Unable to sit any longer, she settled her shawl tightly around her shoulders and stepped out into the tumult of the storm. Lightning illuminated the manor's overgrowth, and the sodden earth clung to her shoes as she navigated towards the entrance of Brackenridge. It had been a place of mystery since Sir Harold Brackenridge's tragic death just days prior. The villagers whispered about spectral presences, yet Miss Marple knew far too well that the shadows lurking in gardens were often of the human variety. With a gentle push, she opened the creaky door, its groan against the frame echoing through the vast hall. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decaying lilies from an arrangement Sir Harold had loved. As she made her way inside, she could hear murmurs from the drawing-room. Lord Arthur and Lady Margaret Brackenridge, Sir Harold's somewhat aloof relatives, discussing matters unfit for polite company. His affairs were in utter disarray, it appears, Lord Arthur voiced sharply, the sound cutting through the otherwise stagnant air. Yet all we seem to focus on is the scandal surrounding his death. The police have ruled it accidental, yet, Lord Arthur, surely you cannot persist in such far-fetched suspicions. Uncle Harold was a dear man, despite his follies, Lady Margaret interjected, her tone strident, underscored by fatigue and worry. And what exactly do you hope to find in probing him past the grave? Miss Marple's ear pricked. Their words revealed layers of resentment, and she could see the tension curling around them like the tendrils of smoke from the fireplace. What indeed lay at the root of their discourse? With calculated stealth, she peeked through the half-open door. The flickering flames danced shadows across their faces, creating an unsettling tableau. A portrait of Sir Harold hung above the mantel, silently watching as unkindness bubbled beneath the surface when his loved ones spoke his name. Perhaps it's time someone ventures into the garden, Miss Marple suggested as she entered the room, her voice soft, yet firm. Miss Marple, must you intrude upon our— Lord Arthur began, but she waved her hand dismissively. It's not merely an intrusion when curiosity beckons. The garden tells stories of its own, and this one may be particularly revealing. Lady Margaret's gaze shifted anxiously toward the window, where the rain streamed down like tear stains. You're suggesting we indulge in fanciful ploys, dear Miss Marple? Not all is fancy when the possibility of foul play hovers like the fog outside, Miss Marple replied, forcing calm as the palpable tension thickened in the air. The trio stepped out into the garden, drenched and shivering under the glowering sky. Twisted branches loomed ominously, forming a maze of unsettling glimpses. Miss Marple's keen eyes softened the shadows around her. You know, gardens harbor secrets. The untrimmed corners often conceal something very telling, she remarked, recalling her own rosebush, which still bore the mark of last summer's blight. They moved towards a patch of darkened soil where the rain had washed away the light mud, and there, partially buried, was a tarnished, intricate silver locket, its clasp broken, but its surface glistening with the remnants of rain. Miss Marple stooped to retrieve it, brushing away the debris like uncovering a forgotten truth. It belongs to Patricia, no doubt, Lord Arthur said, grimly, eyes narrowing with suspicion. She always lacked respect for precious items. Lady Margaret, her complexion suddenly pale, turned towards him sharply. Patricia's musical flair has kept us occupied, not her misplaced trinkets. What proof do you have? Proof? He scoffed. This locket, if I'm not mistaken, was a gift intended for your cousin, Lady Margaret, Miss Marple interjected, raising a finger thoughtfully. Couldn't it merely be that Patricia fled to some youthful dalliance, quite unbothered by trivial matters? Oh, Patricia isn't the light-hearted girl you think she is, Lady Margaret interjected bitterly. She accommodates whims and travels. Who knows where she's really been? Or with whom? Added Miss Marple softly. As they exchanged glances filled with unspoken accusations, a distant sound, a hollow thud from the garden shed, drew their attention. They moved quickly, the rain obscuring their vision, as Miss Marple sensed an urgent pull. Before they could approach the shed, another flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating a figure inside. Unmistakably, it appeared to be Patricia, standing still, her hands frozen against the flimsy wall. Before Miss Marple could call out, the shed door swung shut, heavy and eerie against the wind. "Patricia!" she shouted, racing forward as the figures behind her blinked with confusion. Was it desperation that drove her, or had the shadows revealed yet another secret? With bated breath and urgent determination, Miss Marple reached for the door, ready to confront the darkness, lurking not only in the garden, but in the hearts of everyone present. In that moment, the game was afoot, and a questionable truth lay tantalizingly close. As the thunder rumbled ominously overhead, she braced for what lay behind that door, knowing that this time the true story would not remain buried for long. Would perhaps a perpetrator reveal themselves amid the echoes of thunder? The frisson of revelation shivered through her as she gripped the handle, determined to uncover the reality behind the shadows in the garden. Chapter 6. The Suspect Who Vanished. The rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the thatched roof of Miss Marple's quaint cottage in the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead. It was one of those nights that seemed to murmur secrets and whispers, where shadows danced just beyond the reach of flickering candlelight, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. Sitting in her armchair with her knitting, Miss Marple found her mind wrestling with the chaos that had upended the village in recent weeks. Twice in as many months, death had knocked on their doors, and she had little doubt that the recent disappearance of Edwin Hargrove, the local schoolteacher, would mark a third tragedy. As she looped the yarn through her fingers, a loud rapping on her front door startled her. With a slight frown, Miss Marple rose carefully, straightening her sensible cardigan before peeking through the glass pane. It was Constable Perkins, drenched to the skin, and his uniform plastered against him like a second skin. She opened the door, allowing the tempest to rage just outside, filling her cottage with the scent of rain mixed with the distant aroma of wood smoke. "Miss Marple, I come with urgent news," he said, breathless and anxious, his eyes darting around anxiously as if expecting shadows to come leaping out from behind the hedgerows. "Edwin Hargrove has been found." "Oh dear, where, Constable?" Her heart raced at the thought, the delicate yarn slipping from her fingers and gathering clumps across the floor. "He was at the edge of the woods, near the old Wellington mansion. But he's not alive, Miss Marple. He's had a terrible fall, or worse." For a fleeting moment, Miss Marple's heart sank. She had known Edwin, a kind-hearted man, burdened by the weight of small-town expectations. "The Wellington mansion? I thought it was abandoned," she murmured, already formulating 1,000 questions. "Most everyone does, yet I always had my doubts. The villagers had taken to treating it like a ghost. We suspect that he stumbled upon something he shouldn't have." Constable Perkins's wet hat hung limply in his hands, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Brenda Wellington. She arrived in St. Mary Mead only last week. They found Edwin's watch tangled in some bracken nearby, the same one he'd brought from London." Brenda Wellington? The name struck Miss Marple like thunderclaps against the tranquil facade of village life. Brenda had inherited the old manor and arrived under a shroud of controversy, not a blessing, but a curse, given her family's dubious reputation. She became a suspect overnight, didn't she? "She hardly had time to leave town," Constable Perkins rubbed his chin. "But just this evening she seems to have vanished into thin air. Her belongings remain in the manor, but Brenda herself is unaccounted for. Her car sits parked at the edge of the property." Miss Marple's mind raced through the threads of recent gossip that bound the villagers together. Everyone had an opinion about Brenda, from her flamboyant attire to the very manner of her inheritances. You say Edwin was found near the house? What time was it? It was dark when we arrived there. Some of the villagers claim they'd seen a light flickering in the mansion's upper windows earlier in the evening, but it disappeared. No one knows when exactly or who was there. Do you suppose he was attempting to signal for help? Questions formed like raindrops on her intuition. A fine tension gripped her as she began to realize Brenda's potential role in this unfolding tragedy. Perhaps, he sighed, his brow furrowing, but I can't say for certain. Only, there's been talk. They say Edwin was set to confront her about something. He found out about the family's past, secrets buried for decades. Miss Marple took a sip of the tea she had prepared earlier, pondering this new thread. Secrets had a way of curling around the truth, twisting it until it bore no resemblance to the original. You must go and draw the right conclusions. Constable Perkins bristled at the implication of his own inadequacy. I may need your help, Miss Marple. Sky awfully dark out, isn't it? She asked, already lifting her coat from the hook. Time to pay Brenda a visit before the rain washes away any trace of her whereabouts. The manor loomed before them like a sentinel against the storm, exuding an air of somber opulence through its weather-beaten facade. Thunder rumbled, and she felt a chill race down her spine as they entered the property through its iron gates. The interiors whispered secrets of their own, echoes of laughter now silenced. I noticed something amiss, Miss Marple said, squinting through the dimly lit great hall lined with portraits of the Wellington family. The family crest. It's been placed at an odd angle, and look, the dust reveals the last item she touched. At the foot of the ornate staircase, a dusty letter lay half hidden beneath an ornate mat. Miss Marple knelt to retrieve it. As her fingers fluttered over the faded parchment, a knife of fear twisted in her gut. It was unfinished, yet so intimate. And then just as she leaned in closer, she heard a thud from the second floor, the unmistakable sound of something heavy crashing to the ground. Constable, she gasped, wrenching her gaze away from the letter. We must hurry. Move. As they rushed upstairs, Miss Marple's heart raced. What if it was too late? The wind howled outside, seeming to urge them onward, through the labyrinth of darkened corridors. The smell of rain mingled with the heavy scent of polished wood and oil paintings as they reached the door at the end of the hall. What had Edwin found, and could it reveal the fate that awaited them? Miss Marple seized the knob, twisting it open as a tempest roared behind them. And then, darkness fell. Chapter 7. A Whisper from the Dead. The storm thundered angrily against the windows of St. Mary Mead, lashing rain against the old stones of Miss Marple's cottage. The night was darker than usual. Shadows danced under the flickering gas lamps, casting an overwhelming sense of foreboding in the small village. Inside, Miss Marple sat cross-legged in her favorite armchair, knitting needles, clicking resolutely, though her mind was anything but focused on the soft wool in her hands. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was afoot. Too many secrets hung over the neighborhood like clinging fog. The evening had started innocently enough when a frantic knock interrupted her solitude. It was Mrs. Thimble, breathless and wide-eyed, her cheeks flushed from fear rather than the night's chill. Miss Marple, you must come at once. It's Mr. Harrington, she exclaimed, glancing nervously toward the street, as though expecting something to leap from the shadows. He's dead. Miss Marple's heart quickened as she dropped her knitting. Mr. Harrington was the local botanist, a peculiar soul, but well-liked by the ivy-clad villagers. "What happened, dear?" she inquired, her voice steady but laced with concern. "Found him in his greenhouse," Mrs. Thimble stammered, clutching her shawl. It looks like an accident, but I felt there was something more sinister." They hurried through the rain-slicked streets, Miss Marple moving with an agility that belied her years. As they entered the twisted path leading to Harrington's abode, the aroma of damp earth swirled around them. The old manor loomed ahead, its windows aglow with warm light, an incongruity against the backdrop of their ominous thoughts. Inside, the scene was grim. The greenhouse smelled of wet soil and stationed pots, an odor now mixed with a coppery tang suffusing the air. A crowd had gathered around Harrington's lifeless body, sprawled amongst a pot of pristine white orchids, a striking contrast against his pallid skin. Miss Marple drew closer, surveying the tableau. Something was off. The way Harrington lay was too unceremonious for a gardener intent on his craft. More like a man who had been disturbed unexpectedly, she decided. "Isn't it awful?" Mrs. Thimble whispered, peering over Miss Marple's shoulder. "But look, no blood, just a bump on his head." Miss Marple bent low, observing the edge of the greenhouse table near the body. Crowded with pots and tools that seemed quite orderly, her eyes narrowed at a strange arrangement of dirt at the base of a nearby pot. "Indeed, dear. An accident it may seem, but the location speaks volumes." Mr. Baxter, the village constable, stepped forward, his heavy brow furrowing in confusion. "It appears he fell, but the question remains, how?" Miss Marple lifted her chin, recalling something that had been rattling around in her mind since she learned about Harrington. "He was always vocal about his enemies," she said softly, her attention flickering from the body to the gathered villagers, her eyes lingering on one familiar figure, a tall, sullen man with a perpetual scowl. Gregory Finch, Harrington's old rival in both botany and whispers of romantic entanglements, seemed to avoid her gaze. "Was this quite the friendly rivalry?" Miss Marple asked Baxter, noting Finch's disquieted demeanor. "Hardly. Harrington claimed he was stealing his techniques, and Finch wasn't shy about voicing his opinions," Baxter replied, scratching his head. "But do you think he could have gone so far?" Finch, overhearing the subtle exchange, stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington was a fool," he declared, tone doused in irritation. "But I would never harm him. His failure was his own." "Perhaps," Miss Marple mused, keenly aware that Finch's outburst hinted at something deeper. "But failure can often breed resentment." She turned, watching as the villagers clustered, whispering among themselves. "There's more at play here," she said, more to herself than to anyone. "Tell me about that bump on his head, would you, Constable?" As Baxter began explaining the details to her, she abruptly shifted her focus past him. A dark figure emerged through the haze of chatter, a woman she recognized from the corner of her eye, Mara Lowell, a close friend of Harrington's and a fellow botanist. Her attire was immaculate, yet out of place in a greenhouse setting, her expression a complex tapestry of grief and relief. "Miss Lowell, were you present when Mr. Harrington met his end?" Miss Marple inquired, her words deliberate. Mara hesitated, eyes darting toward Finch, as if weighing her fidelity against the truth. "No, I arrived too late to help. I'd been distracted, visiting another garden," she answered. "Indeed? What garden might have kept you occupied tonight?" Miss Marple prodded, arching her brow. "Just the La Roche estate, mending a fallen trellis." "Nothing of importance," Mara deflected, but the tremor in her voice was unmistakable. As Miss Marple was about to ask another question, a sudden crack of thunder rang outside, causing everyone to flinch, the timing too perfect to dismiss. There was a fleeting moment of silence before the crowd erupted into startled exclamations, but beneath it, Miss Marple noted an intimate whisper between Finch and Mara, their intensity deceptively benign. Feeling the urgency of a hidden truth, she cleared her throat. If we could have a look at Harrington's late correspondence, perhaps we might discern who he feared most in these last days. The suggestion hung in the air, and eyes turned toward Finch and Mara, who exchanged glances that seemed to pass unspoken affirmations amidst the spectral gloom. Just as Miss Marple stepped towards the house, a sudden gasp erupted from the crowd. A flash of silver caught her eye. A small, ornamental dagger had fallen from beneath Harrington's body, glimmering ominously amidst the foliage. Gripping it carefully, the threads of the mystery tightened around her mind like an intricate web. With her instincts tingling, Miss Marple turned toward the crowd, the storm raging louder outside. One must consider, what does a garden truly hide, and who among us is ready to take the blame for a whisper from the dead? The words echoed faintly as she held the dagger aloft, illuminating the mounting tension. Something was still hiding in the shadows, and with that, Miss Marple knew this was just the beginning. Chapter 8. The Clue in the Attic. The rain tapped persistently against the window panes of Miss Marple's cozy drawing room. A rhythmic patter that echoed within the dim, shadowy corners of her home in the quiet village of St. Mary Mead. The surrounding villagers might have found comfort in the familiar sound, but for Miss Marple, it only heightened her sense of foreboding. The murder of Colonel Hargrove had rattled the quaint comfort of their community, and suspicion seeped through their gardens like a creeping vine. Tonight, the clock struck 10, and beneath the weight of her unease, she resolved to seek solace in the stacks of her well-ordered library, seeking the distraction of a good book. Just then, the sound of distant footsteps reached her ears, accompanied by an urgent knock at the door. It was Annabel, the Colonel's distraught niece, her face pale, eyes wide with desperation. "Aunt Jane," Annabel stammered, for that's how she affectionately referred to Miss Marple. "You must come. Something horrible has happened." Before Miss Marple could gather her shawl, Annabel had taken her by the arm, leading her through the sheets of rain towards Hargrove Manor. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth as they trudged. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the sporadic bursts of lightning that illuminated the sprawling estate like a ghostly apparition. Once they stepped inside the manor, the heavy wooden door creaked ominously behind them. "They keep saying it was an accident, but I cannot believe it, Aunt Jane," Annabel insisted, her voice quaking. "The attic. I found something." Miss Marple tightened her grip on the young woman's arm and led her up the narrow staircase, the steps groaning as though echoing their dread. The attic door cracked open like a sepulchre, revealing a dim, dusty expanse, cluttered with old trunks and long-forgotten bric-a-brac. Energized by Annabel's agitation, Miss Marple approached the grim tableau with measured caution. "There," Annabel pointed towards a battered trunk, half hidden beneath the tattered remnants of a faded blanket. "I opened it when I felt something was amiss, but what I found—" "Oh, Aunt Jane." As they knelt by the trunk, Miss Marple's keen eyes scanned the contents. A motley collection of old letters, framed photographs of family gatherings, and resting atop it all, a worn diary bearing the initials C.H. "Can you read it?" Annabel asked, the urgency in her voice underscoring her turmoil. Stretching her fingers toward the diary, Miss Marple flipped it open and scanned the day's notes, her brow knitting together in concentration. June 2nd, 1941, she read aloud. I can no longer remain silent about the truth behind the estate. There is mention of a family secret, my dear. This is pivotal. But what does it mean? Annabel pressed, peering over Miss Marple's shoulder. We shall see, dear girl. Often the buried past can illuminate present shadows, Miss Marple replied, a glint of resolve igniting in her eyes. Practicality urged her to finish the diary entry in silence, scanning the words, until the sudden sound of a thump in the corridor startled them both. They exchanged worried glances. A muffled voice could be heard, threatening to break the delicate thread of their inquiry. Someone's coming, Annabel whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Miss Marple knew the impact of misdirection in a mystery. An unseen hand could manipulate the truth as easily as the storm manipulated the night. Quickly, hide, she commanded, stashing the diary inside her quintessentially battered handbag. The two women huddled in the shadows behind the heavy trunk. Thunder rumbled as heavy footsteps echoed through the attic. A figure materialized, silhouetted against the attic door. It was Mr. Phineas Blake, the steadfast butler whose loyalty to the colonel was only matched by his unyielding reserve. His brow furrowed as he scanned the room, sensing the disruption in the air. Mr. Blake, Miss Marple whispered as she risked a glance from their hiding spot, intrigued by the man's sudden somberness. Is anyone there? Mr. Blake called, his voice shaking with an urgency that startled Miss Marple. I need you to come out. It's no longer safe in the house. Miss Marple strained to hear as he continued. I understand. I must find the truth before it's too late. Before what's too late? Annabel breathed, and they were met with an anxious silence. Miss Marple felt a swell of compassion reconcile her deductions with the implications of Mr. Blake's unease. For a man devoted to his master, the revelation of secrets could be damaging. Perhaps it was not only the colonel's death that weighed on his conscience, but deeper familial strife, complicated by fear of exposure. As quickly as he had arrived, Blake turned and rushed down the staircase, leaving a pregnant pause in the air thick with tension. Miss Marple eased herself from behind the trunk, a cunning glimmer in her eye. We must find out what he knows, she whispered determinedly to Annabel. And this diary, I believe, holds the key to the mystery. Do not speak of our finding it to anyone just yet. Our path may be fraught with hidden motives and deceptions. With each stroke of the ticking clock echoing like ominous footsteps, Miss Marple knew she was close to unraveling the threads woven by a cunning hand. But the night's revelations lingered behind them, cloaked in the darkened corners of the manor. A confrontation beckoned. For the attic bore not just dust, but memories long buried, and as rain lashed mercilessly against the roof, Miss Marple felt its implications weigh heavily. Whatever the fate awaiting them, the next chapter was about to unfold. The final clue awaited her discovery just beyond the threshold of light. Chapter 9. The Final Gathering. The wind howled through the twisting branches of the ancient oaks, whipping the rain into a frenzied dance against the darkened windows of the Brayford Manor. Within the walls of this creaky relic, a palpable tension enveloped Miss Marple and the gathering of esteemed guests, each harboring secrets as twisted as the gnarled trees outside. The old manor, with its faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards, felt alive with whispers and furtive glances that hinted at treachery. Miss Marple, ensconced in the faded armchair in the drawing-room, was acutely aware of the changes in the room's atmosphere since the events of that tragic evening. Just a week ago, the life of Geraldine Pritchard had been snuffed out. leaving questions that echoed louder than the storm outside. The assembled guests, family, friends, and acquaintances, each with their own ties to the victim, simmered with a mounting dread, their muffled conversations merging with the thunder outside. At that moment, the door flung open, casting a slender silhouette against the gusty night. It was Inspector Craven, his brow furrowed and his coat slicked with rain. "I trust I'm not interrupting," he said, surveying the room with an authoritative gaze. The assembled group, momentarily hushed, turned their attention to him. "Such a night for a gathering," said Dr. Sinclair, a tall, distinguished man with a thin moustache that twitched as he spoke. "The winds must be telling their own tale." Nervous chuckle escaped from Lady Penelope Granger, her pearls glinting in the flickering firelight, but it faded quickly as she caught the mood of the room. "Gathering indeed. I fear we may need to come together for a different reason," Craven replied, meeting Miss Marple's eyes with a blend of respect and urgency. "It would appear that another incident is looming over our heads." The room, now suddenly alive with apprehension, awaited his revelation. "Earlier tonight, Albert, the groundskeeper stumbled upon a rather alarming discovery in the garden." He cleared his throat, his voice low. "A portion of a torn letter, half-soaked and illegible, but one word stands out: Lest. It was clearly addressed to Geraldine." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Miss Marple's mind raced. "Lest what, Inspector?" she prompted, her tone deceptively calm. "Lest she reveal their secret," Craven continued. Whomever it was addressed to seemed quite distressed about what Geraldine might expose. Lady Penelope clutched her pearls. Was she blackmailing someone? Or someone was indeed blackmailing her? Miss Marple interjected thoughtfully, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the gathered faces. People often forget how much a word can denote. As Dr. Sinclair pored over the letter fragment, the atmosphere thickened with suspicion. The storm outside intensified, shards of rain slashing against the windows, mirroring the tension mounting in the room. The guests exchanged glances laden with anxiety. Complete trust among them had become as elusive as the flickering flames in the fireplace. Miss Marple perceived something more profound beneath the surface. "Tell me," she said, addressing Reggie Pritchard, Geraldine's younger brother, who sat stiffly in a corner, "what do you know about this letter?" Reggie's jaw clenched, his features tight. "I don't know anything, really. Geraldine was well respected, never hinted at any secrets." His voice faltered. A blush crept over his cheeks. "But I did overhear her speaking to someone, though I don't recall who, about a lesson they had learned from their past." "A lesson?" echoed Miss Marple, leaning forward. Curious phrasing indeed. So intricate, yet easily forgotten. Reggie shifted uneasily. It must have been a simple conversation. Miss Marple perceived the fracture in his nonchalance. Simple, perhaps, she determined, but hardly innocent. The most innocent of conversations often cloak the greatest of dangers. "Did Geraldine ever mention anything to you about an old family dispute? Or maybe a frayed relationship?" Reggie's face paled, and he glanced furtively toward Lady Penelope, who seemed equally perturbed. "There were whispers, but I can't quite recall. Something about an inheritance." Craven's expression sharpened. "Is there animosity among the heirs?" Lady Penelope interjected, her voice rising in volume as she leaned forward. "With Geraldine gone, the estate belongs to Reggie, and certainly there are families who wouldn't take kindly to his sudden rise." Her expression turned tempestuous, each syllable clenching the room tighter. Family matters do have a way of creating rifts, Miss Marple commented, a glimmer of realization igniting within her mind. And sometimes, characters fitting their roles too perfectly inspire suspicion. At that moment, the candles flickered ominously and a thunderclap echoed in the distance, causing everyone to jump. Miss Marple seized the opportunity for a final piece of deduction. "Excuse me, but may I ask if anyone here has noted the peculiarities of Geraldine's will?" "What matters that?" Reggie snapped defensively, but the alarm in his voice betrayed him. The others turned towards him, realizing the implication of the question. "You'd be surprised what one finds in those intricate bits of papery history," she said, her gaze piercing through him, sensing the undercurrents of family loyalty and betrayal. "Ah, yes," Lady Penelope added, her tone dripping with feigned innocence. "We all know a mere will can sometimes hold more than just wealth. It can bloody well hold a motive." But it was the calmness in Reggie's demeanor that suddenly shifted the nature of the conversation. "We all want to speak of wills and secrets," he declared with more poise than he felt. "But what of the deceased? Did she live with her secrets, or was she more of an open book than we ever assumed?" Miss Marple watched him closely, a sensation brewing beneath her skin. Yet here we sit as the final gathering, and we must now ask ourselves, who among us might prefer that the secrets remain buried? As Craven prepared to question the assembled guests even further, a loud crash thundered from the direction of the garden, a sudden shattering of glass that resonated throughout the manor, stopping all conversation. Miss Marple stood abruptly, the urgency of the night creeping into her heart. "I believe it is now time to uncover the truth, don't you? We must not leave until we have unearthed every last layer of this formidable riddle." Indeed, just as Miss Marple turned to address the group, she caught sight of a shadow skimming past the window, a flicker of movement that promised further mysteries to unravel. As the storm raged on, it was clear that the final gathering would not conclude without more revelations and darker truths waiting in the storm. Chapter 10. The Revelation in the Ruins. The air was thick with a pall of rain that had settled over the village of St. Mary Mead, rendering the old stones of Grimsby Manor dull and sombre. Miss Marple pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, the storm casting flickering shadows through the dimly lit room where she sat, the blistering wind echoing the turmoil of truths yet to be uncovered. Just days prior, she had been drawn into a tangle of suspicion after the turning up of John Talbot's body in the manor's east wing, and now, with the thunder rumbling ominously, she felt certain that one more revelation was imminent. In the flicker of candlelight, she noticed the hastily scrawled note on her desk, its corner hastily crumpled. It was from Caroline Trueworthy, her steadfast friend and ever-enthusiastic amateur sleuth. The words were tinged with urgency. "Miss Marple, we must meet at the ruins tonight. I have found something important." Miss Marple grabbed her coat, the rain drumming a slow, steady rhythm against the roof as she pulled it over her shoulders. The manor loomed behind her, a creaking reminder of the segregation between the past and the murky present. Stepping out into the tempest, she felt the icy tendrils of wind tugging at her, but a certain fire flickered in her heart. She had long held an instinct that deeper secrets lay just beneath the surface of even the quietest of lives. As she passed through the overgrown path to the ruins, she recalled how that place had once been the pride of the estate. Now it lay in disrepair, cloaked in the shroud of nature's dominance. Caroline's silhouette awaited her, half blurred against the rain-soaked backdrop. "Miss Marple," she called out, waving frantically. "Over here." Suddenly, a crashing sound reverberated through the night, a stone dislodged from a parapet high above, splashing down only a few feet from where Miss Marple stood. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Miss Marple, her heart racing. What on earth was that? Caroline's expression flickered with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm not sure, but I found something in the cellar beneath the east wing of Grimsby Manor. You must see it." The two women hurried towards the crumbling steps, leading into the shattered remnants of what was once a grand hall. Gloaming shadows danced beneath the ruins, illuminated by the intermittent flashes of lightning. As they descended the slick stones, the cold moisture settled into their bones, and an odd stillness enveloped them. "There, in the dark corner!" Caroline gestured excitedly as they reached the cellar, her voice echoing in the damp corridors. They edged closer to an old rotting chest that had once belonged to Lord Grimsby. With a quick motion, Caroline pried it open, revealing a confusing array of belongings, the contents obscured by age and neglect. Within the chest, amidst decaying letters and yellowed silk, lay something glinting, a delicate locket, intricately crafted, but tarnished by time. Miss Marple leaned closer, recognizing the insignia engraved upon its surface, the entwined initials of an individual familiar to her. "Is that not Harold's?" she whispered, the name lingering on her tongue as she remembered the affable but shifty gentleman who had come by the village in recent months, seeking employment from various estates. Yes, I believe it is," Caroline replied breathlessly. "What could it possibly be doing here?" Just then, a low rumble reverberated once more, this time accompanied by the splintering of wood. They turned to find a figure emerging from the shadows, a man cloaked in the very rain they had fought against, a silhouette against the faintest glow of the moon, now breaking free from the cloud cover. "Miss Marple, what a surprise," said Harold, a smile failing to reach his eyes. "And dear Caroline, too. I hope you haven't stumbled upon anything untoward." "Just a bit of inquisitiveness, I assure you," Miss Marple replied coolly, her gaze steady. "It seems you've left something behind." "Surely, it's nothing of consequence." His voice held a casual dismissiveness, but a sheen of sweat began to form on his brow. Grimsby Manor has had its share of mysteries, nothing more than the reflections of a past long gone. "And yet, here you are at the ruins on this dark night," Miss Marple countered, her voice growing sharper. "What are you truly doing here, Mr. Sinclair?" Harold blinked, momentarily, flustered, but regained his composure with a practiced ease. "I merely came to explore a bit of history, my dear Miss Marple. The stories of this place have intrigued me since I first set foot here." "Perhaps it's the locket that intrigues you," Caroline snapped, her fingers grasping it tightly. "We know its owner, you know." "I don't believe we have time for games," he said, his tone darkening. "People have gone missing. This is not the place for petty archaeology or childish curiosities." Just then, the sky split open, and a surge of lightning struck not far away, illuminating the ruins and throwing the three figures into stark relief against the tempest. In that moment, as the world struck mute in the suddenly freezing air, Miss Marple's eyes glinted with realization. "Someone has been hiding in the shadows of this mystery," she said slowly, her heart pounding with the looming threat of truth. "And I suspect you lead right back to John Talbot's death." Harold stiffened, his expression shifting as he took a step backward. "You don't know what you're treading into, Miss Marple." "No, she replied, her calm voice unwavering. "But I intend to find out." And just as their exchange unfolded, a loud crash resonated through the ruins. A stone wall gave way. The shadows shifted, unearthing a hastily concealed door behind it. The breath of the echoes from beyond beckoned, carrying with it the weight of secrets long buried. As they stared in disbelief, a chilling realization sunk in. The answers they sought lay nestled within, a dark invitation too potent to ignore. Miss Marple took a step forward, driven by the relentless pursuit of truth that had defined her very being. The tension crackled in the air, a promise of perilous revelations to come, punctuated by the grasp of a storm. "Are we ready, ladies?" she asked, resolve flashing in her eyes. "Our next revelation lies before us." The door yawned open, invitingly, dangerously, leaving them on the threshold of the unknown. Chapter 11. The Truth Buried in the Garden. The rain fell in a steady rhythm, tapping against the windows of St. Mary Mead, like a persistent intruder. Miss Marple had just settled into her comfortable armchair, a well-worn novel in hand, when the shrill ring of the telephone cut through the quiet evening. It was a call she was expecting, though she had hoped it wouldn't come quite so soon. Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove, the esteemed local botanist, had discovered something alarming while tending to her beloved garden at Hargrove Manor. Miss Marple hastily donned her raincoat and grabbed her umbrella, her mind racing. What had Mrs. Hargrove uncovered? The recent string of odd occurrences and unfortunate happenings around their quaint village had her on alert, yet the thought of a secret buried in a garden was tantalizing. As she stepped out of her cottage, the cool night air mingled with the petrichor, filling her lungs with a sense of urgency. When she arrived at the Hargrove estate, the usually vibrant blooms of the garden seemed ghostly in the moonlight, shadows flickering like whispers among the flower beds. Miss Hargrove stood at the edge of her prized rose bushes, her face alight with an unsettling mix of excitement and dread. "Agatha, I fear we've found something that should not be here," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the rain's patter. "What is it?" Miss Marple approached cautiously, her keen eyes assessing the surroundings. Beatrice pointed to a section of the garden, the earth upturned, clumps of rich soil displaced, as if a grave had been hastily dug. "I was putting in new bulbs, and, well, I unearthed a box. I thought it might be something of sentimental value, but then I noticed it was sealed tightly, caked in mud, and, well, it's the evidence of those who've gone before us." With a feeling of both dread and anticipation, Miss Marple knelt before the mysterious box, the rain mingling with the sweet scent of damp earth. Carefully, she brushed the dirt away, her fingers trembling slightly as she pried open the lid. Inside lay a collection of items, each more disquieting than the last: a tarnished silver locket, a crumpled letter, and what appeared to be a hairpin that once belonged to a woman of some elegance. "Who does it belong to?" she asked, carefully inspecting the items. Beatrice's brow furrowed in thought. There were rumors floating about concerning a lady of the manor from generations past, Lady Eleanor. They say her spirit haunts these grounds because of a tragedy involving a forbidden love affair. Miss Marple recalled her conversations with the villagers. The threads of history were but whispers, often riddled with embellishments and the idle gossip of years gone by. Yet, within those stories, she sensed an unmistakable pulse. The truth often lay beneath layers of myth. Just then, a head popped up from the edge of the property, startling them both. It was Daniel Fairbanks, the local handyman, known for his convenient appearances during moments ominous. Rain-slicked and shivering, he seemed equally intrigued and apprehensive at the sight of Miss Marple and Beatrice. "What is it this time, ladies?" he stammered, eyeing the box warily. Miss Marple noted the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. "Perhaps you could help us identify these items, Mr. Fairbanks. They seem to belong to a woman of means." Daniel gulped, pulling his cap lower over his brow. I can't say I know much about locket belonging to a lady. My father used to tell tales, you know. But time has a way of burying such stories. Not all feel inclined to recall them." "Ah, but some stories are worth unearthing," Miss Marple replied gently, fixed on his shifty demeanor, "especially if they can illuminate dark corners of our present." Before he could answer, a loud crack of thunder flashed imperiously overhead, causing Beatrice to jump. The air, thick with tension, turned electric as the rain intensified. The three sheltered themselves under the gnarled branches of an ancient oak tree, its branches sheltering them like a giant umbrella. As the storm rumbled above them, Miss Marple took up the locket, feeling its weight in her palm. "What's inside?" she mused, glancing back at the box. Friends used to say Lady Eleanor loved to wear her locket," Beatrice whispered, a tinge of zeal edging her voice. "Perhaps we should see if it holds any further secrets." With a delicate turn, Miss Marple opened the locket to reveal a tiny portrait of a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, the likeness strikingly reminiscent of Beatrice herself. "This is peculiar," she murmured, her gaze narrowing. "It certainly looks like you, Beatrice." Beatrice flushed and took a step back, almost as if the locket itself had repulsed her. "It cannot be," she stammered. "That cannot be me. I've never—" Miss Marple's intuition danced with delight. "To be of the same lineage as Lady Eleanor might explain your ties to the garden, and possibly her motives. Beatrice, it isn't just a family photograph. This represents a connection, a legacy." Suddenly, Daniel interrupted, his voice breaking through the storm's din. "There's been talk of deeper things on this estate, Miss Marple. Speak not of spirits and legacies. They've brought misfortune to this estate and to those who pry." Deflated and bewildered, Beatrice turned to Daniel. "You think I'm to blame for trouble too? Must we live in fear of the past?" As the rain poured unabated, Miss Marple felt the tension coiling tightly, an unseen threat lingering in the air. The only certainty she held was the solemn weight of the locket in her hand. What secrets were yet buried in the past, and what shadows lingered in their village? As thunder cracked above, the storm raged outside, yet in that moment, a sudden realization seized her as the distant echoes of Lady Eleanor's tragic story flashed in her mind. There was one more item to unearth. She felt certain of it. Before she could voice her intuition, a figure erupted from the darkness beyond the garden, shrouded in shadow, a figure they all recognized, yet could not yet trust. "Stop right there!" the figure shouted, advancing through the sheets of rain, pale and set, as Miss Marple held her breath. Secrets began to churn, and the truth was now closer than ever, heavy like the impending rain on their shoulders. It was time to confront the buried past or be swallowed by it. Chapter 12. The Confession. No one heard. The old grandfather clock struck 11, its chime echoing through the dimly lit drawing room of Rose Cottage, a creaky abode that seemed to creak and groan under the weight of its storied past. Outside, the rain fell in relentless sheets, tapping against the window panes like pleading fingers. Miss Marple had long since grown accustomed to the rotund sound of water cascading from the eaves. It added a peculiar air to the night, enhancing the tension that had gripped their quiet village of St. Mary Mead. A sudden, desperate knock on the door shattered the creeping stillness. Miss Marple rose from her chair, her knitting abandoned on her lap. "Goodness, who could that be at this hour?" she murmured, moving with the fluid grace of someone far younger. Just as she reached the door, it burst open with an unceremonious rush. Margaret Elkins, a local shopkeeper and one of the last to see the late Mr. Barnaby, hurled herself into the room, her face flushed and her breath ragged. "Miss Marple, you must help. It's about—" Before she could finish, Miss Marple observed the peculiar glint in Margaret's eye, a mix of fear and determination that set off alarm bells in her mind. "My dear, do come in. Gather yourself," she said, directing Margaret to a cushioned armchair, which creaked in protest as she sat down. "Everything's gone mad. The village is awash with whispers," Margaret panted. "They say that Mr. Barnaby's confession, it was about a murder, and it's linked to the festival this Saturday." "A murder? Surely you're not suggesting Mr. Barnaby was about to confess to something before he passed?" Miss Marple's gaze remained steady, sifting through the layers of Margaret's panic. "Yes. I visited him that afternoon, you see. He was agitated, speaking in riddles. Something about water and shadows." Margaret shivered. "I thought it nonsense until now, but with him dead, it feels like a dire warning." Miss Marple's mind raced. Water and shadows. What could he have meant? Perhaps he intended to reveal a secret cloaked in metaphor. But just as she was piecing together a coherent thought, the crack of thunder outside punctuated the night, and a gust of wind rattled the shutters. Their eyes widened as a new figure appeared in the doorway. Henry Trenchard, the village solicitor, soaked to the bone. "I heard the commotion. What's happened?" "Mr. Barnaby had a secret," Margaret cried, her voice rising above the din. "He was on the brink of confessing something dreadful." Henry's brow furrowed, and he stepped closer, the somber look on his face betraying an inner turmoil. "We can't speak of such matters without solid proof. Barnaby was troubled, yes, but was that enough to warrant such drastic measures?" "Tell me, Mr. Trenchard," Miss Marple interjected, her intuition honed in on Henry's unusual perspiration and fidgeting hands. "When last did you meet with Mr. Barnaby?" "A week ago for estate matters," he replied, averting her gaze. "I had no reason to believe he was in any peril. Yet his last words, water and shadows, have set an alarm in Miss Elkins's heart." Miss Marple leaned in, holding his eyes. "Could you be shielding something from us?" Trenchard's gaze hardened, a flicker of defensiveness clouding his features. "That's enough, Miss Marple. I do what's necessary to protect this village's interests." Margaret had gone pale. "But we deserve the truth. If Barnaby knew anything—" "The truth?" Henry interrupted, raising his volume. "Truth comes at a price. It's better left unsaid if it breeds chaos. I've seen it before." "That may be, but if Mr. Barnaby indeed left us a message through those words, then chaos may already be imminent," Miss Marple replied, her tone calm but razor-sharp. "Come now, Margaret. Was there anything else? A letter? A note? Perhaps the initials of those mentioned?" After a moment's hesitation, Margaret's eyes sparkled with recognition. He spoke of someone drowning in their past, someone who had suffered. Their initials. F.W. Miss Marple's mind turned. The wheels in her head churned. F.W., it could only stand for— "Francine Weatherby," Henry interjected, his voice thick with concern. "But why would Barnaby connect her to this?" "Because Francine Weatherby The village's beloved fishmonger hasn't been seen in days, Margaret whispered, a tremor of awareness threading through her. What if she knows what Mr. Barnaby was trying to confess? Then we must find her quickly, Miss Marple declared, a pulse of adrenaline coursing through her. The night holds its secrets close, but it seems we have a lead. If Mr. Barnaby's words were both haunting and prophetic, we may have very little time left. As they gathered their coats, a shattering sound echoed from the back of the house. A glass falling, perhaps. Miss Marple's heart quickened. We mustn't dawdle. Let us see what secrets the night still holds. Just as they bolted toward the kitchen, the faint but distinctly lingering echo of water rushed, a torrent far stronger than the rain outside. It was then that Miss Marple noticed not just the sense of urgency, but the flicker of shadow moving beyond the light, a ghostly figure at the edge of her vision. "Show yourself," she called, heart in her throat. And then the shadows seemed to writhe, coiling in on themselves, just before the lights flickered and plunged the room into darkness. Miss Marple held her breath, feeling the darkness curl around her like a thick veil of uncertainty, a sharp realization slicing through her thoughts. Some confessions, she mused, were meant to be heard, but this one, it seemed, was hiding in plain sight. Suddenly, a scream pierced the gloom, echoing long and haunting through the walls of Rose Cottage, cutting through the storm outside. Miss Marple's heart raced as she grasped the weight of what lay ahead, her quest for truth now entwined with the spectre of violence and danger lacing every corner of the night. Who would speak, and who would remain shrouded in shadow?